Hey guys, so today we'll be learning about the abolition of slavery in France. And by the way, this is chapter 1 history, the French Revolution, part 5. So all the other parts are already uploaded with the summary, so go and check that out too. So let's get started. One of the most revolutionary social reforms of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. The colonies of the Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo were important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. So what they're telling here is one of the very important revolutionary social reforms was that of the Jacobins regime was that of the abolition of the slavery in French colonies. So the colonies of the Caribbean. The Caribbean is why is Caribbean related to this? What is even Caribbean? It's a really important place for the French during the 18th century because that's where all the plantations were there, and in these plantations only many of the slaves worked. So you'll understand when you keep on going. So in the Caribbean, it's like Martinique and Guadeloupe and San Domingo. These are all the very important suppliers of commodities, and commodities like tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee were also done by the slaves. So by the reluctance of the Europeans to go and work in distant and unfamiliar lands means a shortage of labor on the plantations. So this was meant by a triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa, and America. And the slave trade began in the 17th century. So what they're telling here is the merchants said that the merchants sailed all the way from the French ports of Bordeaux and Nantes and to go to the African coast, and they had brought slaves from the chieftains. Chieftains means a chief of a tribe or a group or a clan. And so human beings were sold to local chieftains of the French and in exchange for money. And these slaves were tied up and they were put tightly packed in ships as if they were commodities, as if they were like some common things that we use. They were put in ships tightly packed, and they had to go 3 months to reach the Africa from Caribbean. And they were tightly packed in ships as if they were a commodity transporting, and they must be in this condition for 3 months. Like, that is too much, right? So it was like a triangular slave trade between so for example, if they have the tobacco, and then they have to first they sell it for Europe and Africa and America, Europe, Africa, America. It just keeps on going like that. So it's like a slave trade, and it began in the 17th century, and the French monarchs sailed from the ports of Bordeaux and Nantes to the African coast, and they bought the slaves of the local chieftains. I'm again telling chieftains means like a chief for a group of clans, or like a group of tribes, like that. So he's like a chief, and where they bought slaves from the chief, and they branded and shackled, and the slaves were packed tightly into ships for a 3-month long ride across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, and they were sold to plantation owners. The exploitation of slave labor made it possible to meet the growing demands in the Europe, which is for markets of sugar, coffee, indigo, and port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owned the economic prosperity to flourish the slave trade. Port cities like this Bordeaux and Nantes own their economic prosperity to flourish the slave trade only. They're like for like Bordeaux and Nantes it's like for the slave trade, like that. And so the French merchants, what they did was they basically sailed to Bordeaux and Nantes in the African coast, where they were bought from the local chieftains, the people who are in group, the chief of the group, and then they were banded, and they were shackled. They were not treated in a very good way, and then they were tightly packed into ships for a 3-month long ride across the Atlantic to the Caribbean Ocean. to the Caribbean, Atlantic to the Caribbean, and then they were sold to the plantation owners. The plantation owners means the plantation of sugar and the plantation of coffee leaves and all that. And the exploitation of the slave labor made it possible for if there is very less amount of food and there are a lot of people, so there is a lot of demand for food. And if there are slaves like this, it made it possible for the growing demand in Europe to making for the markets of like sugar, coffee and indigo. And ports in cities and border acts and antis owned their economic prosperity to flourish the slave trades only. And then throughout the 18th century there was little criticism of slavery in France, and the National Assembly held long debates about whether the right of man should be extended to all French subjects including those in the colonies, but they did not pass any laws, fearing the opposition from the businessman whose incomes depend on the slave trade. It was finally the convention which in 1794 legislated to all free slaves in the French overseas possessions. So what they're telling here is, so the National Assembly were pretty much debating about putting whether on the rights that to all people of the society should have equal rights, not with only the man for the richer society, or to put it for every people, like even in people like in these colonies who are slaves. But they didn't do anything because they were fearing, and they were thinking that the chieftains or the people in the chief of them will be disappointed or be unhappy with this rule, because of that only it's meeting the demands of food, because there is a lot of population rise too, right? So businessmen were the people who paid the highest taxes to the government. And then later in 1794, under the Jacobean government, a resolution to free the call of slaves overseas was passed by the convention under the Jacobean government. What they are telling here is, it's not abolished or anything. The slaves, without even telling the reason, they can be taken overseas for doing this plantation purposes. So let's see again. The National Assembly held long debates about seeing whether rights of the man should be extended to all French subjects including those in the colonies, but they did not pass any laws, fearing the opposition of the businessman whose income depend on the slave trade. It was finally the convention of 1794 which legislated that to free all the slaves in the French overseas possessions. So if they have to go overseas, they have to go, there is no other option. So and then in 1794 this happened to free all the slaves. If they have to go overseas, that's a rule. So it's like which was a resolution to free the call of slaves overseas was passed by the convention of under the Jacobean government. Okay, so I hope you understood that. And then this, however, turned out to be a short-term measure, and 10 years later Napoleon reintroduced the slavery plantation, and owners understood their freedom as including the right to enslave Africans. Negroes are at that time they were using the term Negroes. It's nothing but a derogatory term which was once used to refer the indigenous people of the Africa and the south of Sahara. The people who are not very rich, and the people of Africa and south of Sahara were the Negro people. That they don't use these terms now. At the time they were using. And this, however, turned out to be a short-term measure, because 10 years later Napoleon reintroduced slavery, and the plantation owners understood the freedom including right of everyone, which is the African Negroes, and to pursue their economic interests, and slavery was finally abolished in the French colonies in 1848. Okay. Yeah. So let me tell you guys again that in 1848 the slavery was abolished. But what is Negro? Negro is a term which was once used to refer the indigenous people from the Africa and the south of Sahara. And this part is very important. And yeah, let me just tell you. The highest taxpayers of the government are called as the businessmen, and then a resolution to free the call of slaves overseas was passed, which is whenever they call the slaves have to go like that. And then later it was a short-term measure. 10 years later Napoleon reintroduced the slavery, and the plantation owners understood the freedom including the right of enslaved African Negroes and to pursue with their economic interests too, and the slavery was finally abolished. That's all. Yeah, okay, see here. A term used for indigenous people of Africa out in the south of Sahara is called as Negroes. It's a derogatory term which is not common in use any longer. And yeah, so that's all, you guys. You guys can go and see this too. Yeah, so yeah, I hope you guys like this video. The part 6 will be uploaded soon, so make sure you go and watch that too. Make sure you like, share and subscribe for more videos. Bye.